Kaled is a realm of hostility where rot and putrefaction have tainted every stone, tree, and creature within that damned land. From the smallest to the biggest, nothing is pure here. Even the very tales told are not spared from corruption. I ventured to Kaled seeking a magical relic to aid in the struggle against this rot, but there's a grave chance that the corruption might also taint my soul. On the flank of one of many cliffs, I found a cave entrance surrounded by dead roots. Light holds immediately at the entrance, and the darkness seemed to whisper, asking me to enter. If I wanted this object, I had to risk everything, and I knew this the moment I gazed upon that doorway into the bowels of the earth. Putrefaction and its allies sought to hunt me down, but I knew I was better than them. The fight was long and some say unfair, but I slayed the clean rot knights, and the golden scarab was finally in my hands. Will I be able to control this amount of power? Who can say? For this sculpt, I have to explore the scarabs from Elden Ring. The game doesn't revolve around them, but they have a fair share of protagonism. I have to understand how are they built and how everything connects, so I looked everywhere to find out. If you take a look, the shape of the scarabs slightly varies between the talisman and the wearable helmets found around the game. The helmets look like the actual insects, and the talisman is basically a miniature version of them, clearly made out of some kind of metal, gold in this case. So I decided to go with a shape that resembles mainly the talisman, but implementing some of the rounder features of the helmets and in-game scarabs. About the little symbol, I decided to go with the original from the talisman, which resembles a swirly mark, just to stay true to the design. And upon investigation, I found that the ball rolling scarab that is drawn in the art book has the same swirl as the talisman, but none of the rolling scarabs in the game have that mark. The only similarity is the silver scarab talisman. Interesting. This is actually very normal since during game development, the concept artworks created almost never look exactly like the finished in-game designs. On the final stages of the scarab sculpt, I'm adding small bevels and engravings to make it look like a handmade metallic object. And finally, after adding some imperfections and scratches, the scarab itself is finished. Let's see my design choices before painting it. I used the general shape of the talisman with its characteristic opened wings and raised tibia, going into a small ring shape at the top. Then, since I like the shapes from the helmets and in-game versions of the rolling scarab, I infused some of its more rounded features into my version, making it a little bit chunkier in the process. Looking at the clean rot knights that carry the talisman, I decided to incorporate a more intricate design with ornamental details and even some gems that I would paint red. Especially noticeable on the opposite part that I had to design completely from scratch, the big gem will give a nice red accent like the capes of the knights do. And on that note, let's go to the painting process. This sculpt is the smallest I've done for the channel, but it might be my favorite so far. I really liked working on it because it had this gameplay aspect to it where I had to actually defeat bosses and explore the immense world of Elden Ring. I haven't played many Souls-likes, but I might be getting too much into it lately. I'm even working on a small video game idea that I want to do, just to learn game pipelines and understand how to implement my own art into it. So far, Elden Ring has been a very good learning experience and inspiration, not only in terms of gameplay but art as well. If you like these kind of videos, let me know in the comments because I would love to make more talismans, characters, or bosses even, while studying the art of the game. Also, if you feel like it, you can recommend games that you think have underrated art or that you feel are worth exploring. For the Scarab I used 4 different shades of golden metallic paint and other 2 shades for airbrush. I knew metallics would work nicely with this sculpt, and they have a huge mixing potential, making the whole painting experience very fun. My version of the golden Scarab is not exactly fully golden like the original. It has some bronze accents and gems on the front and back. Nonetheless, I think it still keeps that golden shine pretty well. If I were to design the silver Scarab, I would make it so it differs from the golden in terms of shapes as well. The in-game versions of them only differ in color, which is a little bit underwhelming. But I also can understand if they had the reasoning behind it, since at the end, Scarabs in Elden Ring are not that different from each other. Making a huge change in terms of design on one of them could feel out of place. But I will still make it different and give the talisman at least 20,000 words of lore. The gems were a design choice that I wasn't too sure about at the beginning. If I were to do them, they needed a good reason, and as you saw previously, as soon as I saw the elaborate armor of the Cleanrot Knights and their bright red cape, it was a no-brainer. I even thought of using real glass gems, but I decided not to. It would be easier for you to download it, print it, and start painting right away without looking for a gem that will fit the hole. Scarabs are a sign of luck and fortune in many civilizations. Egyptians had small engraved beetles with spread wings, similar to the one that I'm painting right now. And those were usually related to important figures like gods and pharaohs. There could be connections to the Egyptians even with the dung beetles that roll the tears around the Elden Ring. In ancient Egypt, the dung beetles were believed to represent the journey that the sun makes every day. They just imitate what Khepri does, which is the god that moves the sun from east to west. Khepri is a very important figure and is closely related to Ra, which is the god of the sun. As well, I think it's a very nice touch that some of the scarabs in Elden Ring give you cerulean and crimson tears, doing something very similar to Khepri, which his main function as a god is to renew life. Also, the idea of them disappearing into nothingness could be linked to the mythology, since in ancient Egypt they were already thought of appearing from nothingness. Now, on the final stages of the paint, I'm working on making the scarab look used and old. I'm using the engravings as places where dirt and patina could form. Kelid is not known to be the most pristine area of the game. I will talk about Kelid and continue with the sculpt base in a moment, but for now, here are some images of the finished scarab. After an insane battle between two of the mightiest demigods, this land was terraformed into a rotten prison for all who had the misfortune to witness such a display of power. Kelid is like breathing death. Every time I set foot in this place, a strange feeling washes over me. Time seems to slow and every being has a lost look in their eyes. The mushrooms and rot flowers appear to be the only things that know where they are and what their purpose is. They are going to be a key element for the base that I want to create to display the Scarab on. I like the idea of creating a base that corresponds to the environment that the talisman is found in, and that's why I decided to go with a Khalid inspired one. Looking at these mushrooms and lichens, I have the feeling that they could be a very interesting addition to the base. Not only because they have beautiful shapes, but because they can also serve as support for the Scarab. Also, when painting the Scarab, I thought ahead and added the red accent just so now when combined with the base, they share an element, making them feel more unified. I drew inspiration from the small compositions of elements scattered across Khalid, like this group of fungi and mushrooms. Then I looked into the lichens, and I'm sure some of you feel a slight repulsion from this. That might be your trypophobia. In my opinion, this is a very clever design choice for a place like Khalid. Misery and unease are condensed on every surface here. This mixed with the music that always makes you think that there's something behind you. The creatures that roam around here and the uncanniness of the remaining castles being there in a red sea of death makes Khalid a masterfully crafted nightmare. After wandering around this place, I found the 5 key elements that my base would have. First, I need the red filled with rot soil. Then the lichen that will serve as the main support for the talisman. The bigger fungi-like shapes that I decided to give a rounder look to match the Scarab. These small pointy appendices that help with the uncanny feeling, they almost look like worms. And finally, the mushrooms will complete the composition. Combining all these elements with a sense of balance and utility, I get to the final stages of the base sculpt. It's nice to paint something with such a big body of work behind. There's a whole world with lore and stories that one can be inspired by or draw reference from. Like many artists in the past who looked at even older masters and learned from their work, I today explore a whole game with beautiful art and stories and try to learn from it as much as possible. Every movie director you know, every painter or writer has their own favorite story or idea that made them start doing what they do. And in many cases, that other thing is another story, another person. Games like this are like a lesson from a wizard that you find in the forest. In the right eyes, these bodies of work and ideas can reveal important answers to people who seek them. The amount of thought and purpose given to each part of the game from so many directors, programmers, animators, artists makes studying games like this a must, in my opinion. Especially as a medieval fantasy enjoyer, I look at these artistic choices and I dream of talking with the artists and animators behind them. Maybe one day, who knows? This base has a main purpose, which is to support the Scarab while visually extending the lore behind it. And I went with a smaller size because the aggressiveness of the shapes and its bold colors might be too overwhelming for the graceful golden Scarab. That's why I even decided to soften the shapes in some areas, like the bigger mushrooms or the tiny spikes. In some of my other videos, I've talked about this idea of making sure each element of a design belongs to the same world, unless the design choice is not to. To me, that idea is important because doing so, you make sure that you don't have so many conflicting design ideas and you get a chance to conceptually and structurally enhance your designs. With a fairly diluted paint, I go on top of the soil, infusing some of that scarlet wrought color, and since these are the last stages of painting the base, now the goal is to make sure that the shapes feel good by retouching them. The Scarab is meant to rest on top, so I made sure that the paint will resist the eventual wear of the area, using a few layers of varnish that will seal the paint, also preventing it from tainting the Scarab. And that's it. This is the final result, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to make more like this. You can subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the future videos. But for now, see you and stay strong.